Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed the rocky mountain path. The morning sun was already beating down on the jagged peaks of Mount Drakkar, and his heavy toolkit made every step feel like a marathon. He was a simple telecommunications technician, sent to repair a damaged cell tower that had gone offline during last week's storm. Nothing in his 20 years of experience had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The tower stood on a narrow ledge, its metal frame twisted and bent from the fierce winds. Marcus set down his equipment and began his inspection. The damage was worse than he had expected. Several cables were completely severed, and the main support beam had a dangerous crack running through it. He would need at least 3 hours to make the repairs properly. As he worked, connecting new cables and reinforcing the damaged structure, Marcus heard something unusual. It wasn't the wind or the usual mountain sounds he was familiar with. This was different, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the mountain itself. He paused his work and listened carefully. The sound came again, and this time it was accompanied by what sounded almost like whimpering. Marcus had always been curious by nature. His wife Sarah often joked that his curiosity would get him into trouble someday. Today might be that day. Following the sounds, he discovered a narrow crevice in the rock face, partially hidden by fallen boulders. The opening was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and the sounds were definitely coming from inside. Against his better judgment, Marcus grabbed his flashlight and squeezed through the opening. The passage opened into a much larger cave, and what he saw inside made him question his sanity. Lying in the center of the cave was a dragon. Not a mythical creature from fairy tales, but a real, living dragon with scales that shimmered like emeralds in his flashlight beam. The dragon was magnificent, but clearly in distress. Its left wing was trapped under a massive boulder that had obviously fallen during the recent storm. The creature was about the size of a small elephant, with intelligent golden eyes that fixed on Marcus with a mixture of fear and hope. Deep cuts and scrapes covered its body, and its breathing was labored and painful. Marcus stood frozen for several minutes, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Dragons were supposed to be legends, stories told to children, yet here was undeniable proof that they were real. The dragon made another soft whimpering sound, and Marcus noticed that it was trying to move its trapped wing. Fresh blood was seeping from where the boulder pressed against the delicate wing membrane. Something in those golden eyes touched Marcus deeply. Despite his fear, he could see intelligence there, and pain, and a desperate plea for help. This was not a monster or a dangerous beast. This was a thinking, feeling creature that was suffering. Marcus had always been the type of person who helped others, whether they were human or animal. This situation was no different, even if the animal was a dragon. He approached slowly, speaking in soft, calming tones. The dragon watched his every move but didn't try to attack or flee. When Marcus was close enough, he carefully examined the situation. The boulder was large but not impossible to move with the right leverage. He had ropes, pulleys, and other equipment in his toolkit that might help. Working carefully, Marcus set up a pulley system using his climbing ropes and some sturdy rock formations. The dragon seemed to understand what he was trying to do and remained perfectly still. It even shifted its body slightly to give Marcus better access to the boulder. This level of cooperation convinced Marcus that the creature was not only intelligent, but also grateful for his help. The first attempt to move the boulder failed. Marcus wasn't strong enough, even with the mechanical advantage of his pulley system. He sat back thinking hard about the problem. The dragon watched him patiently, occasionally making soft sounds that almost seemed encouraging. Marcus realized he needed more leverage, a longer rope, and a better anchor point. He spent the next hour setting up a more complex system, using his technical knowledge to create maximum mechanical advantage. The dragon never took its eyes off him, and Marcus found himself talking to the creature as he worked, explaining what he was doing just as he might explain a repair job to a curious homeowner. When everything was ready, Marcus took a deep breath and began to pull. The rope grew taut, the pulleys creaked under the strain, and slowly, incredibly slowly, the boulder began to move. The dragon made a sound that could only be described as a sigh of relief as pressure was released from its wing. Marcus pulled harder, muscles straining, until finally the boulder rolled away completely. The dragon immediately tried to move its freed wing, then cried out in obvious pain. Marcus could see that the wing was badly damaged, with tears in the membrane and what looked like a possible fracture in one of the wing bones. The creature would need medical attention, but Marcus had no idea how to treat a dragon's injuries. He did what he could with his basic first aid supplies, cleaning the wounds and fashioning a makeshift splint for the wing. The dragon submitted to his ministrations with remarkable patience, even seeming to appreciate his gentle touch. When Marcus was finished, the dragon looked at him with those intelligent golden eyes and made a sound that was unmistakably grateful. Marcus realized he had been in the cave for hours. His repair job on the cell tower was forgotten, and the sun was beginning to set. He knew he should leave, but something held him back. The dragon was injured and vulnerable. What if other predators found it? What if the weather turned bad again? As if reading his thoughts, the dragon struggled to its feet and limped toward the back of the cave. It turned and looked at Marcus, then made a sound that seemed like an invitation. Against all logic and safety protocols, Marcus followed. The cave extended much deeper into the mountain than he had realized, and what he discovered next would change his understanding of the world forever. The deeper passages of the cave revealed wonders that Marcus had never imagined. The walls were lined with what appeared to be natural crystal formations, but as his flashlight beam played across them, Marcus realized they were arranged too perfectly to be natural. Someone or something had deliberately placed these crystals to create a soft, ambient lighting throughout the cavern system. The injured dragon moved slowly but purposefully, clearly familiar with every twist and turn of the underground maze. Marcus followed, his amazement growing with each step. The passages opened into vast chambers, some with underground pools of crystal-clear water, others with what looked like carefully tended gardens of unusual plants that seemed to glow with their own inner light. After walking for nearly 20 minutes, they emerged into the largest chamber yet. Marcus gasped and nearly dropped his flashlight. The cavern was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But what truly took his breath away was that this chamber was clearly inhabited. Along the walls were carved alcoves and shelves, filled with objects that Marcus couldn't immediately identify, but which had obviously been crafted with intelligence and purpose. There were what looked like tools, artwork, and even furniture sized for creatures much larger than humans. In the center of the chamber was a raised platform with what could only be described as a throne, carved from a single massive crystal. The injured dragon called out, its voice echoing through the vast space. The sound was answered immediately by other voices coming from passages that Marcus hadn't even noticed. Within moments, 3 more dragons emerged into the chamber. These were larger than his injured friend, with scales of deep blue, brilliant red, and shimmering silver. Their eyes fixed on Marcus with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. Marcus felt his heart racing. 1 dragon had been manageable, even friendly. 4 dragons was an entirely different situation. He stood perfectly still, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. The injured dragon moved between Marcus and the others, making sounds that seemed like explanations. The interaction was clearly some form of communication, with different tones and inflections that suggested a complex language. The largest dragon, the silver one, approached Marcus slowly. Its eyes were ancient and wise, and Marcus had the distinct impression that this creature was very old and very intelligent. The dragon examined him from head to toe, then did something unexpected. It bowed its great head slightly, in what was unmistakably a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. The other dragons followed suit, and Marcus realized that his act of kindness had earned him some sort of acceptance in their community. The injured dragon was clearly explaining what had happened, and the others were responding with what seemed like approval and gratitude. Marcus found himself bowing back, not sure what else to do, but feeling that some response was appropriate. What happened next surprised him even more. The silver dragon moved to one of the carved alcoves and retrieved what looked like a large, leather-bound book. But as it was brought closer, Marcus could see that it wasn't made of leather or paper at all. The pages seemed to be made of some thin, metallic material, and the writing on them glowed softly in the dim light of the chamber. The dragon opened the book and pointed to various symbols and diagrams. Marcus couldn't read the language, but the pictures were clear enough. They showed dragons and humans working together, building structures, sharing knowledge. There were detailed drawings of the very cave system he was standing in, but in the pictures it was bustling with activity from both species. Marcus stared at the images in wonder. These drawings suggested a history of cooperation between humans and dragons, that went back centuries, maybe millennia. But if that was true, where were all the humans now? Why were dragons considered mythical creatures? What had happened to break this ancient partnership? The silver dragon seemed to understand his confusion. It turned several pages and pointed to a new set of images. These were darker, showing conflicts and misunderstandings. Dragons fleeing to hidden places, humans with weapons, cities burning. The story told in pictures was one of a great falling out, a war perhaps, that had driven the dragons into hiding and relegated them to the realm of human mythology. The injured dragon had been receiving attention from the others while Marcus studied the book. They had brought what looked like medicinal plants and were carefully cleaning and treating its wounds with obvious expertise. Their movements were gentle and precise, showing a level of medical knowledge that impressed Marcus greatly. One of the dragons, the red one, approached Marcus with something in its claws. It was a small, intricately carved pendant made from what looked like the same crystal that lit the cavern. The dragon held it out to Marcus, clearly offering it as a gift. When Marcus accepted it, the pendant felt warm in his hands and seemed to pulse with a gentle light. As soon as Marcus put the pendant around his neck, something extraordinary happened. The sounds the dragons were making suddenly became comprehensible. Not in English, but he could somehow understand the meaning behind their communications. It was as if the pendant was translating their language directly into his mind. The silver dragon, who Marcus now understood was the leader of this group, was speaking to him. The words formed in his mind not as sounds but as direct communication. "Human friend," the dragon said, "you have shown kindness to our injured youngling. This has not happened in many generations of our kind. We are grateful and we are curious. How do you come to be here? And what do you know of the old ways?" Marcus tried to respond, not sure if the communication worked both ways. To his amazement, it did. When he thought his response, the dragon seemed to understand. He explained about his work on the cell tower, how he had heard the sounds and investigated, and how he had felt compelled to help when he found the injured dragon. The leader listened carefully, then shared more of their history. These dragons were the last of their kind in this region, perhaps in the world. They had been hiding in this mountain for over 300 years, since the last great persecution had driven their kind from the surface world. They survived by being extremely careful, never revealing themselves to humans, living off the mountain's natural resources and their own knowledge of cultivation and hunting. The injured dragon, whose name translated roughly as Swiftwing, was the youngest of their group and the most curious about the outside world. Despite warnings from the elders, Swiftwing often ventured close to the surface, watching human activities from hidden vantage points. The storm that had trapped him under the boulder had caught him during one of these unauthorized explorations. As the evening wore on, Marcus learned more about dragon society. They were highly intelligent, with knowledge of medicine, engineering, and sciences that far exceeded human understanding in many areas. They had developed sustainable ways of living that had allowed them to thrive in their hidden mountain home for centuries. They cultivated special plants that provided both food and medicine, maintained complex water systems, and had developed crystals that provided clean, renewable energy. But they were also deeply lonely. The loneliness was perhaps the most profound emotion that Marcus sensed from them. They had been forced to cut themselves off from the world they had once been part of, living in isolation while watching human civilization develop without them. They missed the old partnerships, the sharing of knowledge and friendship that the ancient books depicted. As the night deepened, Marcus realized that he was experiencing something unprecedented in modern human history. He was not just meeting dragons, he was being welcomed into their society as a friend and equal. The implications were staggering, but even more important was the growing bond he felt with these magnificent creatures. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. Marcus spent the night in the dragon cavern, sleeping on a bed of soft, luminescent moss that the dragons had prepared for him. The crystal pendant around his neck continued to translate their communications, and he found himself drawn into long conversations about technology, philosophy, and the history of both their species. When morning came, he knew he had to return to the surface world, but leaving felt like tearing himself away from a family he had just discovered. Swiftwing was recovering well, thanks to the advanced medical care provided by the other dragons. The wing would heal completely, though it would take several weeks. The young dragon was grateful beyond words and had already begun asking Marcus dozens of questions about human society, technology, and life in the outside world. The silver dragon, whose name translated as Ancient Wisdom, walked with Marcus to the cave entrance. Before they parted, the elder dragon shared a warning that made Marcus's blood run cold. Their hiding place was in danger. Human activity in the mountains had increased dramatically over the past few years. Mining operations, hiking trails, and communication towers like the one Marcus had been repairing were bringing more and more people closer to their secret home. Even worse, Ancient Wisdom explained, there were signs that some humans might already suspect their presence. Strange equipment had been detected near the mountain. Devices that seemed designed to scan for heat signatures or unusual electromagnetic activity. The dragon's crystal technology, while clean and efficient, did emit energy patterns that could potentially be detected by advanced human sensors. Marcus felt a heavy responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had stumbled upon the last refuge of an ancient and magnificent species, and now he learned that refuge was threatened. Ancient Wisdom made it clear that they were not asking him to solve their problems. But Marcus could see the hope in the dragon's ancient eyes. For the first time in centuries, they had found a human they could trust. When Marcus finally returned to his truck, he was shocked to discover that his supervisor had been trying to reach him for hours. His radio had been buzzing with increasingly urgent messages. The cell tower repair was supposed to have been completed the previous day, and when Marcus failed to report in, a search party had been organized. Marcus quickly finished the tower repairs, his mind racing as he worked. The job that had originally seemed so important now felt trivial compared to what he had discovered. How could he focus on connecting phone calls when he had just made contact with a species that most humans believed was mythical? How could he return to his normal life knowing that the dragons were in danger? The drive home was torturous. Marcus practiced dozens of different ways to tell his wife Sarah about what had happened, but every version sounded insane. Who would believe that dragons were real? Even if he showed people the crystal pendant, they would assume it was just an unusual piece of jewelry. The translation ability only worked for him, and he had no way to prove what it could do. Sarah was waiting for him when he got home, worry evident on her face. Marcus had never been late without calling before, and she had spent a sleepless night imagining all sorts of accidents that could befall a man working alone on a mountain. When Marcus tried to explain where he had been, he found himself telling a heavily edited version of the truth. He mentioned finding an injured animal and spending time helping it, but he couldn't bring himself to say the word dragon. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into research. He spent every free moment studying the history of the Mount Drakkar region, looking for any references to dragons or unexplained phenomena. What he found was fascinating. There were dozens of old stories dating back to the earliest European settlers about great winged beasts living in the mountains. Native American tribes in the area had legends about thunder beings that matched dragon descriptions perfectly. More interesting were the modern reports. UFO sightings in the area were unusually common, with witnesses describing objects that moved too organically to be aircraft, but too purposefully to be natural phenomena. Several hikers over the years had reported finding strange crystal formations that seemed to emit light, though when investigation teams returned to the reported locations, nothing unusual was ever found. Marcus began to understand that the dragons had been very clever about concealing their presence. The crystal technology that powered their civilization was probably responsible for many of the unexplained electromagnetic phenomena reported in the area. Their careful movements in and out of their cave system, always at night and in bad weather, had given rise to stories of mysterious flying creatures that scientists dismissed as misidentifications of known wildlife. But the research also confirmed Ancient Wisdom's warnings. Government geological surveys were being conducted throughout the mountain range, ostensibly looking for mineral deposits. Private companies were applying for mining permits. A new highway was being planned that would bring vastly more traffic through the area. The dragon's hiding place would not remain secret much longer. Marcus knew he had to return to the cavern, but he also knew he needed to be smarter about it. Taking vacation time from work, he prepared for a longer visit. He bought camping gear, additional medical supplies, and most importantly, a sophisticated camera. If he was going to help the dragons, he might need proof of their existence to convince others. The second visit to the dragon cavern was even more remarkable than the first. Swiftwing's wing was healing beautifully, and the young dragon was eager to show Marcus more of their underground world. The cavern system was vast, extending for miles through the mountain, with areas dedicated to everything from food cultivation to advanced workshops where the dragons crafted their crystal technology. Marcus learned that the dragons were master engineers. Their understanding of crystal physics and electromagnetic fields was centuries ahead of human science. They had developed sustainable energy sources, water purification systems, and even primitive forms of what humans might call computers, all based on their manipulation of natural crystal matrices. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus discovered that these 4 dragons were not alone. Ancient wisdom revealed that there were other dragon communities hidden throughout the world, small groups that had survived the persecution of centuries past. They maintained contact through a complex communication network based on their crystal technology, sharing information and coordinating their survival efforts. The global dragon community had been watching human technological development with great interest and growing concern. Human science was advancing rapidly in directions that would soon make dragon concealment impossible. Satellite imagery, heat sensors, ground-penetrating radar, and other technologies were making it increasingly difficult for dragons to remain hidden. At the same time, human activity was destroying many of the remote locations where dragon communities had established their refuges. Climate change, deforestation, mining, and urban expansion were forcing dragons from hiding places their families had used for generations. Some communities had already been discovered, with results that ranged from government cover-ups to tragic misunderstandings that ended in violence. Ancient wisdom explained that the dragon communities had been debating their options for decades. Some advocated for deeper hiding, retreating to even more remote locations like deep ocean trenches or Arctic caverns. Others argued for limited contact with trusted humans, hoping to find allies who could help protect dragon refugees. A few radical voices even suggested full revelation, believing that modern humans might be more accepting than their ancestors. Marcus found himself at the center of this debate. His rescue of Swiftwing had proven that at least some humans could still show kindness to dragons. His technical knowledge and understanding of human society made him a valuable potential ally. But involving him also meant taking enormous risks. If Marcus betrayed their trust accidentally or intentionally, the consequences could be catastrophic for dragon communities worldwide. The weight of this responsibility was overwhelming. But Marcus also felt honored to be trusted with such momentous secrets. As he spent more time with the dragons learning about their culture and history, he began to develop a plan. If the dragons were going to survive in the modern world, they would need human allies. But they would need to be very careful about choosing those allies and revealing themselves gradually to the right people, under the right circumstances. The question was, how could a simple telecommunications technician from Colorado possibly help orchestrate the most significant revelation in human history? Marcus returned home from his second visit to the Dragon Cavern with his mind spinning with possibilities and fears. The photographs he had taken were incredible, showing the dragons in their natural environment, but he knew that in today's world of digital manipulation, photos alone would not be enough to convince skeptics. He needed a more comprehensive plan. The first person he decided to approach was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a cryptozoologist he had read about during his research. Dr. Rodriguez had spent her career studying reports of unknown species and had a reputation for serious scientific investigation, rather than sensational publicity seeking. More importantly, her published papers showed a genuine respect for indigenous knowledge and a belief that many mythical creatures might have basis in reality. Marcus crafted a careful email to Dr. Rodriguez, describing his discovery in vague terms and asking if she would be interested in investigating reports of large, intelligent reptilian creatures in the Colorado mountains. He included one photograph that showed crystal formations but no clear view of the dragons themselves. To his surprise, Dr. Rodriguez responded within hours, expressing keen interest and asking if they could meet in person. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his regular visits to the Dragon Cavern. Swiftwing was now fully healed and had become his closest friend among the dragons. The young dragon's curiosity about human technology was insatiable, and Marcus found himself explaining everything from cell phones to automobiles to the internet. In return, Swiftwing taught him about dragon science, particularly their crystal technology. The learning exchange was remarkable. Marcus discovered that dragon crystals could store and process information in ways that were far more efficient than human computers. A single crystal matrix the size of a baseball could hold more data than the largest human servers, while using almost no energy and producing no heat. The dragons had developed this technology over millennia, treating it as both science and art. Ancient wisdom revealed that the dragons had been monitoring human electronic communications for years, not to spy on humans but to understand how human society functioned and to assess potential threats to dragon communities. They had observed the rise of the internet, social media, and global communication networks with fascination and concern. These technologies could be either their salvation or their doom, depending on how revelation was handled. During one of these visits, Marcus met another dragon who would change everything. Her name translated as Starsinger, and she was unlike the others. While Ancient Wisdom, Swift Wing, and the other resident dragons were traditional in their approach to hiding from humans, Starsinger was a radical. She had spent decades traveling between dragon communities around the world, advocating for a more proactive approach to the problem of human encroachment. Starsinger had actually lived among humans for periods of time, using advanced shape-shifting abilities that Marcus hadn't known dragons possessed. She had attended human universities, worked in scientific research facilities, and even served in various government positions, all while maintaining her dragon identity in secret. Her knowledge of human society was encyclopedic, and her network of human contacts was extensive. But Starsinger's most shocking revelation was that Marcus was not the first human to discover dragons in recent years. There were actually dozens of humans around the world who knew about dragon communities. Some were scientists, others were government officials, artists, or activists. A few were even world leaders. The difference was that most of these humans had been carefully recruited and vetted over long periods before being trusted with dragon secrets. Marcus felt both relief and concern at this news. Relief because he wasn't carrying the burden of this secret alone, and concern because it meant the dragon's existence was already more precarious than he had realized. If dozens of humans knew how long before the secret became impossible to maintain, Starsinger explained that the Global Dragon Council, a governing body made up of representatives from dragon communities worldwide, had been preparing for inevitable revelation for over 50 years. They had carefully placed allies in key positions throughout human society, building a network of humans who could help manage the disclosure process when the time came. The question was no longer whether dragons would be revealed to humanity, but when and how. Marcus's accidental discovery and genuine friendship with Swiftwing had accelerated the timeline. The Mount Drakkar community was now under too much scrutiny to remain hidden much longer. Mining surveys had detected unusual electromagnetic signatures in the mountain, and government officials were beginning to ask questions that the dragons couldn't avoid indefinitely. Dr. Rodriguez arrived in Colorado 3 days later, and Marcus met her at a coffee shop in downtown Denver. She was a small, intense woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Marcus had prepared carefully for this meeting, bringing copies of historical documents about dragon sightings in the area and several photographs that showed unusual phenomena without revealing too much. Dr. Rodriguez studied the materials with obvious excitement. She had investigated hundreds of cryptozoological reports over her career, and she could immediately tell that Marcus's evidence was different. The photographs showed technology and architectural details that were clearly not human, but also not random natural formations. The historical documentation was more comprehensive and consistent than anything she had seen before. After 2 hours of intense discussion, Dr. Rodriguez made a decision that surprised Marcus. She told him that she had been in contact with similar researchers around the world, and there had been growing evidence of large, intelligent species in remote locations on every continent. The scientific community was quietly preparing for the possibility that some mythical creatures might prove to be real. More significantly, Dr. Rodriguez revealed that she had been approached several months earlier by a government liaison who had hinted that certain classified discoveries might soon require public scientific validation. The government contact had asked her to prepare protocols for studying and protecting newly discovered intelligent species, supposedly for theoretical planning purposes. Marcus realized that Starsinger and the Dragon Council had been even more thorough in their preparations than he had, imagined. Dr. Rodriguez had likely been identified years ago as a potential ally and had been gradually prepared for eventual contact with dragons without realizing it. With Dr. Rodriguez's scientific credibility behind the investigation, Marcus felt more confident about arranging an actual meeting between her and the dragons. However, ancient wisdom insisted that such a meeting required approval from the Regional Dragon Council, which included representatives from several other hidden communities. The council meeting was held in a vast underground chamber that Marcus had never seen before, accessed through passages that led deep into the earth beneath Mount Drakkar. Dragons arrived from locations throughout the western United States, traveling through a network of tunnels that had been carved and maintained for centuries. Marcus was amazed to discover that some dragons had flown hundreds of miles to attend, while others had traveled through underground routes that connected mountain ranges across multiple states. The diversity among the dragons was remarkable. They varied greatly in size, color, and age, with some being ancient beings who remembered the early days of European colonization, while others were young adults who had never directly interacted with humans. Their perspectives on Revelation ranged from enthusiastic support to deep skepticism. Marcus found himself in the unique position of being the only human present at a gathering that would determine the future relationship between the two species. The council questioned him extensively about human society, technology, and likely reactions to dragon revelation. They were particularly interested in his assessment of human capacity for accepting and protecting a species that had been considered mythical. The debate continued for hours, with dragons arguing passionately in their own language, while Marcus listened through his translation pendant. Some dragons feared that revelation would lead to dragon communities being overrun by curious humans, scientific exploitation, or even renewed persecution. Others argued that continued hiding was becoming impossible, and that controlled revelation was better than accidental discovery. Finally, ancient wisdom called for a formal vote. The decision was not unanimous, but a clear majority agreed to proceed with limited revelation, beginning with Dr. Rodriguez and a small group of carefully selected human allies. Marcus would serve as the primary liaison, helping to manage the disclosure process and ensure that both species' interests were protected. As the council dispersed, Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. In just a few weeks, he had gone from being a simple telecommunications technician to becoming the bridge between two worlds. The decisions made in the coming months would affect the future of both humanity and dragonkind for generations to come. The day of first contact between Dr. Rodriguez and the dragons was carefully planned down to the smallest detail. Ancient wisdom had insisted that the meeting take place in the main cavern, where the dragons would be in their element and could retreat quickly if something went wrong. Marcus spent hours coaching Dr. Rodriguez on dragon etiquette, explaining the importance of respectful body language and the significance of the crystal pendant that would allow communication. Dr. Rodriguez proved to be an ideal choice for first contact. Her years of scientific training had taught her to observe carefully and react calmly to unexpected discoveries. When Marcus led her through the narrow cave entrance and into the vast underground chamber, her gasp of amazement was followed immediately by professional composure. She pulled out a small notebook and began making detailed observations, treating the encounter as the scientific discovery of the century. Swift Wing had volunteered to be the first dragon Dr. Rodriguez would meet, reasoning that his recent experience with human kindness would help him remain calm. The young dragon emerged from behind the crystal formations with obvious nervousness, but his curiosity quickly overcame his fear. Dr. Rodriguez stood perfectly still, allowing Swift Wing to approach at his own pace and examine her as thoroughly as she was examining him. The moment when Dr. Rodriguez first heard Swift Wing's voice through the crystal pendant was magical. Her eyes widened in wonder as the dragon's thoughts formed words in her mind, and tears actually rolled down her cheeks when Swift Wing politely introduced himself and thanked her for coming. Here was proof that dragons were not only real but possessed intelligence and culture that rivaled humanity's own. Ancient wisdom joined them after observing the initial interaction from a distance. The elder dragon's vast knowledge and dignified presence impressed Dr. Rodriguez enormously. She spent hours asking questions about dragon society, history, and technology, filling several notebooks with information that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. But the most significant moment came when Starsinger arrived. The worldly dragon's first-hand knowledge of human society allowed for deep discussions about the practical challenges of revelation. Dr. Rodriguez learned about the global network of dragons and their human allies, and she began to understand the scope of what they were attempting. Starsinger revealed that similar first contacts were taking place simultaneously around the world. In Scotland, a marine biologist was being introduced to sea dragons who had been living in deep ocean trenches. In Tibet, a climatologist studying glacial changes had discovered ice dragons who had been monitoring global warming for decades. In the Amazon, indigenous leaders who had always known about forest dragons were finally introducing them to outside scientists who could help protect their habitat. The revelation process was being coordinated globally, with each contact carefully timed and planned. The goal was to build a foundation of scientific documentation and human allies before making any public announcements. Dr. Rodriguez would be part of a select group of researchers who would prepare the academic and scientific community for the eventual revelation. Over the following weeks, Dr. Rodriguez made regular visits to the Dragon Cavern, each time bringing additional equipment and documentation materials. She conducted extensive interviews with each dragon, learning about their individual histories and areas of expertise. The depth of dragon knowledge in fields like ecology, geology, and energy science was staggering. Swiftwing became particularly excited about sharing dragon technology with human scientists. The young dragon demonstrated crystal computing systems that could solve complex mathematical problems instantly, energy storage devices that made human batteries look primitive, and communication networks that used natural electromagnetic fields to transmit information across continents without any infrastructure. Dr. Rodriguez realized that dragon technology could solve many of humanity's most pressing problems. Climate change, energy production, environmental degradation, and resource scarcity could all be addressed using knowledge that dragons had developed over millennia. But she also understood the dragon's concerns about how such revelations might be received and exploited. Meanwhile, the threats to dragon concealment were intensifying. Government geological surveys had identified the unusual electromagnetic signatures emanating from Mount Drakkar, and classified reports were circulating through military and intelligence agencies. Mining companies were applying for expanded permits that would bring heavy equipment dangerously close to the cave entrances. Most concerning of all, satellite imagery analysis had detected regular patterns of activity around the mountain that suggested the presence of large, unidentified creatures. Military analysts were beginning to speculate about everything, from secret weapons testing to extraterrestrial activity. The dragon's window for controlled revelation was closing rapidly. Starsinger brought urgent news from the Global Dragon Council. Several dragon communities around the world were facing similar pressures, and accidental discoveries were becoming increasingly likely. A community in the Canadian Rockies had been forced to relocate when mining operations came too close to their hidden valley. Sea dragons in the Pacific had been detected by military sonar systems, leading to classified investigations that were getting uncomfortably close to the truth. The council had made a momentous decision. Full revelation would begin within 6 months. Rather than risk accidental discovery or forced disclosure under adverse circumstances, they would take control of the process themselves. A carefully orchestrated global campaign would introduce dragons to humanity in a way that emphasized cooperation, mutual benefit, and respect for both species. Dr. Rodriguez would play a crucial role in this process. Working with her international colleagues, she would publish preliminary research papers that prepared the scientific community for major discoveries in cryptozoology. These papers would be followed by controlled releases of evidence, including photographs, video recordings, and detailed documentation of dragon communities. The plan called for simultaneous announcements in multiple countries, backed by overwhelming scientific evidence and supported by government officials who were already part of the Dragon Alliance network. The initial focus would be on the potential benefits of dragon-human cooperation, particularly in addressing global environmental challenges. Marcus found his role expanding far beyond what he had ever imagined. As the human who had made first contact with the Mount Drakkar community, he was seen as a symbol of the possibility for friendship between the species. Starsinger asked him to travel to other dragon communities, helping to facilitate additional human contacts and sharing his experience with nervous dragons who had never interacted with humans. His first such trip was to a dragon community living in the sea caves along the Oregon coast. These dragons had adapted to marine life, with sleek, streamlined bodies and the ability to breathe underwater for extended periods. They had been monitoring ocean health for centuries and possessed detailed knowledge about climate change effects that human scientists were only beginning to understand. The sea dragons were more cautious than the mountain dragons, having had some negative encounters with human fishing operations over the years. But Marcus's genuine friendship with Swiftwing and his obvious respect for dragon culture eventually won them over. By the end of his visit, they had agreed to participate in the revelation process, offering to share their oceanographic knowledge with human marine scientists. Each community Marcus visited taught him something new about dragon diversity and capabilities. Desert dragons in Arizona had developed incredible skills in water conservation and solar energy collection. Forest dragons in the Pacific Northwest were master botanists who had been secretly protecting old-growth forests for generations. Arctic dragons in Alaska had been tracking ice melt patterns and were eager to share their climate data with human researchers. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery came when Marcus visited a dragon community that had been living beneath New York City for over a century. These urban dragons had adapted to city life, using abandoned subway tunnels and forgotten underground spaces as their homes. They had been observing human society more closely than any other dragon community, and their insights into human behavior and social structures were invaluable for planning the revelation process. The urban dragons had actually been helping humanity in secret for decades. They had prevented several major disasters by subtly influencing infrastructure maintenance, had contributed to medical research by anonymously providing biological insights, and had even influenced stock markets and economic trends to prevent financial catastrophes that could have destabilized human society. As Marcus learned about the extent of dragon involvement in human affairs, he began to understand that the revelation would not just be about introducing two species to each other. It would be about acknowledging a hidden partnership that had been developing for generations. Despite the official separation between the worlds, the question was no longer whether humanity was ready to learn about dragons, but whether humanity was ready to learn how much dragons had already been helping them all along. The day of global revelation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 6 months after Marcus had first discovered Swiftwing trapped under the boulder. The carefully coordinated plan began at dawn in New Zealand, where Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected zoologist, held a press conference at the University of Auckland. Standing beside her was Tidewalker, a magnificent blue dragon who had been living in the underwater caves of New Zealand's fjords for over 2 centuries. The images broadcast around the world were breathtaking. Tidewalker spoke directly to the assembled reporters through a crystal translation device, explaining in calm, measured tones that dragons had been sharing the planet with humans all along, living quietly in hidden communities and hoping for a time when the two species could coexist openly. The dragon's intelligence, dignity, and obvious desire for peaceful cooperation immediately challenged every stereotype humans had about dragons. Within hours, similar announcements were being made on every continent. In Scotland, marine dragons emerged from the depths of Loch Ness, finally revealing the source of centuries of mysterious sightings. In Tibet, ice dragons appeared alongside climate researchers to share crucial data about glacial melting. In the Amazon, forest dragons worked with indigenous leaders to call for stronger protection of rainforest habitats. Marcus watched the global broadcasts from the Mount Drakkar cavern, surrounded by ancient wisdom, Swiftwing, Starsinger, and Dr. Rodriguez. The moment he had been dreading and anticipating for months was finally here. Swiftwing was practically vibrating with excitement, eager to see how humans would react to learning about dragons. Ancient wisdom maintained his usual calm dignity, but Marcus could sense the elder dragon's deep anxiety about how this revelation would change everything. The initial human reactions were mixed, but largely more positive than the dragons had dared to hope. Social media exploded with a combination of amazement, excitement, skepticism, and fear. Scientists worldwide called for calm, careful study of these remarkable discoveries. Religious leaders debated the theological implications of intelligent species, that had been hidden from human knowledge. Politicians scrambled to develop policies for interacting with dragon communities, but there were also troubling responses. Some military leaders immediately began discussing dragons as potential threats that needed to be contained or controlled. Certain government agencies started making plans to capture dragons for study. A few extremist groups called for aggressive action against what they saw as invaders or demons. Starsinger had anticipated these negative reactions and had spent months preparing countermeasures. The Global Dragon Alliance had strategically placed allies in key positions throughout human society, and these allies now worked to shape the narrative around dragon revelation. Prominent scientists spoke about the incredible potential for collaboration. Environmental leaders emphasized how dragon knowledge could help solve climate change. Economists pointed out the benefits of dragon technology for sustainable development. Most importantly, the dragons themselves proved to be their best ambassadors. Every public appearance by a dragon was carefully designed to demonstrate their intelligence, wisdom, and desire for peaceful cooperation. They answered questions thoughtfully, shared beneficial knowledge freely, and consistently emphasized their respect for human achievements and their hope for mutual friendship. Wing finally got his chance to meet the world when the Mount Drakkar community was featured in a major documentary broadcast 3 weeks after the initial revelation. The young dragon's enthusiasm and obvious affection for Marcus provided a powerful example of dragon-human friendship that touched viewers around the globe. Swiftwing's demonstrations of crystal technology and his explanations of dragon science sparked immediate interest from universities and research institutions worldwide. The documentary also featured Marcus's story, from his accidental discovery of the trapped dragon to his role in facilitating the revelation process. Viewers were inspired by the simple act of kindness that had led to such momentous changes, and Marcus found himself reluctantly famous as the symbol of human-dragon cooperation. But the most dramatic moment in the documentary came when ancient wisdom revealed the true extent of dragons' hidden assistance to humanity throughout history. The elder dragon displayed ancient records showing how dragons had secretly helped humans during natural disasters, had provided anonymous assistance during medical emergencies, and had even influenced historical events to prevent wars and catastrophes. The revelation that dragons had been protecting and helping humanity for centuries completely changed the public discourse around their discovery. Instead of being seen as mysterious threats or exotic curiosities, dragons were increasingly viewed as wise guardians who had been looking out for human welfare all along. Public opinion polls showed rapidly growing support for dragon integration into human society. Dr. Rodriguez became one of the leading advocates for dragon-human scientific collaboration. Her research papers, co-authored with various dragons, revolutionized multiple scientific fields. The crystal technology shared by Swiftwing and other dragons led to breakthroughs in computing, energy storage, and communications that promised to transform human civilization within decades. Universities around the world established new departments focused on dragon studies and interspecies cooperation. The first formal academic exchange programs were launched, with human students studying in dragon communities and young dragons attending human universities. Swiftwing was among the first dragons to enroll in a human university, choosing to study environmental engineering at Colorado State University while maintaining his residence in the Mount Drakkar cavern. The economic implications of dragon revelation were staggering. Dragon technology offered solutions to humanity's most pressing challenges, from clean energy production to sustainable agriculture. But the dragons insisted that any technology sharing be done responsibly, with careful attention to environmental and social impacts. They had watched human industrialization for centuries and were determined not to repeat the mistakes of uncontrolled technological development. Marcus found his life completely transformed by the revelation. He left his job as a telecommunications technician to become a full-time liaison between dragon and human communities. His unique experience and genuine friendship with dragons made him invaluable for facilitating new contacts and resolving misunderstandings between the species. More personally, Marcus discovered that his rescue of Swiftwing had sparked something unprecedented in dragon society. Young dragons around the world were inspired by his example of kindness toward a species he had never encountered before. Many began seeking out opportunities to help humans in return, leading to a new generation of dragon-human partnerships that grew stronger each day. The integration process was not without challenges. Some governments attempted to claim jurisdiction over dragon communities within their borders, leading to complex legal battles about sovereignty and rights. A few corporations tried to exploit dragon technology for profit, without proper consent or compensation. Some religious groups struggled to incorporate the existence of dragons into their theological frameworks. But for every challenge, there seemed to be a solution emerging from the growing cooperation between the species. Dragons shared their advanced understanding of ecology and sustainability to help humans address environmental problems. Humans provided dragons with access to global communication networks and modern medical technology that improved dragon health and longevity. Both species benefited from the exchange of art, music, philosophy, and culture that enriched both civilizations. 5 years after that first meeting in the Mount Drakkar cavern, Marcus stood once again in the great chamber where he had first learned about dragon civilization. But now the cavern was bustling with activity from both species. Human researchers worked alongside dragon scientists on collaborative projects. Dragon youngsters played with human children who had come to visit with their parents. Ancient wisdom held court with a group of human philosophers, discussing questions of ethics and consciousness that had implications for both species. Swift Wing approached Marcus with obvious excitement, his scales now bearing the brilliant colors of full dragon maturity. The young dragon had just completed his degree in environmental engineering and was preparing to lead a joint human-dragon expedition to study coral reef restoration in the Pacific. His wing, once trapped and injured, now carried him on missions of discovery and cooperation that would have been impossible in the days when dragons remained hidden. As Marcus watched the bustling activity around him, he reflected on the simple act of kindness that had started it all. Finding a trapped creature and choosing to help despite his fear and confusion had led to changes that neither species could have imagined. The world was now a richer, more complex place, with two intelligent species working together to build a better future for both. Ancient wisdom approached Marcus with a familiar crystal in his claws. But this one was different from the translation pendant Marcus had worn for years. This crystal was larger, more complex, and it hummed with an energy that Marcus could feel even before touching it.